"Are you refusing to sign, Emily?" Derek Vaughn asked softly, and somehow that quiet voice was worse than if he'd shouted. The blue-covered notebook sat beneath Emily Carter's hand. Beside it lay a printed confession form, a silver pen, and a crumpled tip receipt stained with red wine. Her black apron was still dusted with flour from the dessert station. A security camera blinked from the corner of the room. 30 employees stood in absolute silence. Nobody looked at the missing $12,400. They were all looking at her. The room where tips were counted after every Saturday rush wasn't large, but tonight it felt airless. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Ice melted in forgotten drink glasses. Someone's phone vibrated and immediately went silent again. Emily could hear her own heartbeat. Derek folded his hands in front of him and offered the same practice smile he used with angry customers and nervous investors. "Nobody wants this to become a police matter," he said. "We're simply trying to help you make the best decision." The words sounded kind. That was what made them dangerous. 3 hours earlier, Emily had been balancing a tray loaded with tiramisu plates through a sea of laughing diners. The flagship restaurant of the Moretti Hospitality Group glittered beneath chandeliers and polished brass. Wealth moved differently here. It wore tailored suits and ordered $1,000 bottles without checking prices. Emily knew every corner of the dining room. She knew which table tipped generously and which table left nothing but compliments. She knew which floor tile rocked slightly near the wine cellar entrance. She knew how to become invisible. That had always been her talent. At 31, carrying extra weight she had spent years being judged for, she had learned how to disappear before people could decide what she were worth. But disappearing didn't stop people from talking. It never had. Her father used to stand her in front of relatives and demand confessions for money she never stole. By 13, she had learned that innocence and belief were not the same thing. The dinner rush had nearly ended when she noticed something strange. A sealed tip envelope resting beside the manager's office computer. The envelope was marked Saturday Final Distribution. Emily remembered it because the seal had already been broken. She hadn't touched it. She had simply noticed it. Emily always noticed things. An hour later, Derek announced the money was missing. Then came the locked doors. Then the accusations. Then the careful, polite concern. "We all know Emily's been carrying a lot lately," Derek was saying now. "Medical expenses. Long shifts. Stress affects people differently." A few employees lowered their eyes. One nodded. Emily felt the old humiliation rising in her throat. Not anger. Something colder. Recognition. She had heard this performance before. The kind where someone wrapped a knife in velvet before sliding it between your ribs. "I didn't take it," she said. Her voice never shook. Derek sighed as though she had disappointed him personally. "Then sign the statement and let the investigators sort everything out." Emily looked down at the confession form. The words blurred for a second. She saw another room, another table, another pen, another adult demanding she admit to something she hadn't done. Her fingers tightened around the blue notebook. Across the room, a man who had not spoken once finally lifted his eyes from the paper in front of him. Vincent Moretti, owner, Mafia boss, the most feared man in 3 boroughs. He hadn't defended her, hadn't accused her either. He simply watched. Emily met his gaze for less than a second. Then she did something nobody expected. Instead of arguing, instead of begging, she pushed the confession form away and slid the wine-stained receipt toward the center of the table. "Before anyone signs anything," she said quietly, "can somebody explain why this receipt was printed 23 minutes after the envelope supposedly disappeared?" And for the first time that night, Vincent Moretti stopped looking at Emily and started looking at the receipt. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The receipt remained in the center of the table like something dangerous. Vincent Moretti picked it up between 2 fingers and studied it. The paper was damp from spilled wine, one corner curled, the black thermal ink already beginning to fade. 23 minutes. Such a small number. Such a strange place for a lie to begin. Derek gave a soft laugh. Receipts print late all the time. System delays. Network lag. We shouldn't lose sight of the real issue. His tone stayed calm, patient, almost fatherly. The kind of voice people trusted because they wanted to. Emily noticed 3 employees nodding before they even thought about it. Derek had spent years teaching people how to agree with him. Vincent turned the receipt over once, then set it down. "Show me the footage." That was all he said. The security monitor was wheeled into the room. The recording loaded slowly. A grainy view of the hallway outside the manager's office appeared on the screen. Emily stood with her arms folded tightly across her apron. The industrial dishwasher still rumbled somewhere beyond the kitchen wall. Plates clattered. A service bell rang once and stopped. Ordinary sounds. Somehow they made the silence worse. The footage showed employees moving through the hallway, servers carrying trays, bussers pushing carts. Then Emily appeared near the office door. Derek immediately pointed. "There. Exactly what I've been saying." Several heads turned toward her. Emily didn't look at the screen. She looked at the timestamp. 10:14 p.m. Her stomach tightened. "Pause it." Derek sighed dramatically. "Emily, pause it." Vincent's voice was quiet. The video froze. Emily stepped closer. "Look at the clock." Nobody understood at first. Then she pointed toward a digital display hanging above the service entrance in the background. The display showed 9:27. The footage timestamp showed 10:14. 47 minutes apart. A murmur moved through the room. Derek's smile thinned for the first time. "That clock has been wrong for months." "No," Emily said. "I changed the batteries 3 days ago." Silence again. Not confusion this time. Tension. Vincent leaned back slightly. He wasn't looking at the monitor anymore. He was looking at Derek. Only for a moment. Then his eyes returned to the screen. "Anything else?" Emily hesitated. She could feel every heartbeat in her chest. This was the moment people usually stopped talking. The moment they accepted being called difficult. She had spent most of her life swallowing words. Tonight felt different. Zoom in near the office door. The technician enlarged the image. The quality became worse. Blurry. Pixelated. Still, something appeared beside the electronic lock. A green light flashed. A key card entry. Derek folded his arms. "Managers use key cards all day." Emily nodded. "Then why is there no record?" The room went still again. Derek blinked. Just once. Emily reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out an old phone with a cracked screen. Not her current phone. An older one she used for notes and photos because she couldn't afford to throw anything away. She unlocked it and found a picture. "I take photos of shift schedules every week, in case hours get changed." She handed it to Vincent. The image showed the access log posted by the office. One entry had been deleted. Not crossed out. Not corrected. Deleted. A blank space where a card swipe should have been. Derek stepped forward immediately. "That proves nothing." "Maybe," Vincent said. His voice remained flat. "Who had access to remove it?" Nobody answered. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. The dishwasher stopped running. The sudden quiet felt like a held breath. Emily lowered her eyes toward the old phone in her hand. A notification banner sat at the top of the screen. She hadn't noticed it before. It was a banking alert from 18 months earlier. The date matched the first missing tip entry in her blue notebook. And the amount was exactly the same as the deleted keycard transaction report. The notification sat at the top of the cracked screen like a ghost that had waited 18 months to be noticed. Emily stared at it. So did Vincent. Nobody spoke. The amount on the alert was small compared to $12,000. $386.40. Just enough money for most people to ignore. Just enough money for someone careful to steal over and over again. Vincent extended his hand. Emily gave him the old phone. Their fingers never touched. He studied the screen for several seconds before looking up. "Why keep a banking alert from 18 months ago?" His voice was calm. Not belief. Not doubt. Just a question. Emily swallowed. "Because it was the first time my tip payout didn't match my shift record." Derek laughed softly. You kept a notification for a year and a half? He shook his head with practiced sympathy. Emily, that's exactly what worries me. You've been obsessing over this for too long. There it was again. Concern wrapped around accusation. The room shifted toward him automatically. People trusted calm voices. Emily knew that. She had spent her whole life being judged against them. I didn't keep it on purpose, she said. I couldn't afford a new phone. A few eyes dropped. Her cheeks warmed, but she refused to look away. Vincent returned his attention to the screen. Show me the date. Emily pointed. August 14th. 18 months earlier. Vincent looked toward the technician. Pull security archives from that week. Derek moved immediately. Not enough to draw attention. Just one step. One small interruption. Those files are probably gone. The retention system only keeps 90 days. Vincent's eyes shifted toward him. Nothing changed in his expression. Somehow that made the room colder. Probably. Derek hesitated. A fraction of a second. Then smiled. I'll check. Emily saw it. The hesitation. The same way she noticed when customers ordered expensive wine but glanced at prices first. The same way she noticed when a server lied about dropping a tray. Tiny things. Human things. She remembered another detail suddenly. Wait. Everyone turned toward her. Emily pointed toward the access log photo. The deleted keycard entry wasn't the only thing removed. Derek's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Emily stepped closer to the monitor. There used to be a maintenance access code listed under manager access. The technician zoomed in. A blank space appeared beneath the manager credentials. Vincent folded his arms. How do you remember that? Emily looked embarrassed for the first time all night. Because I cleaned the office every Tuesday. Nobody spoke. She continued quietly. I vacuumed under the desks. I emptied the trash. I dusted the shelves. When you spend years cleaning the same room, you notice when things disappear. The words settled heavily across the room. Not dramatic, just true. Vincent lowered his gaze briefly, as if filing the answer away. The technician finally pulled an archived maintenance record from a backup server. The file opened. A list of access codes filled the screen. Most were inactive. One had been disabled exactly 18 months earlier. The same week as Emily's first missing tip alert. The same week as the missing entry. The same week Derek claimed nothing unusual happened. Nobody said a word. The dishwasher had started running again somewhere behind the kitchen walls. Water roared through metal pipes. Ice rattled into a bin. Ordinary sounds. Yet every person in the room was staring at the monitor. Derek reached into his pocket and checked his phone. Too quickly. Then locked the screen. Too quickly again. Vincent noticed. He said nothing. But when Derek lowered the phone, the reflection from the black screen revealed a message preview before it vanished. 3 words. Delete old backups. And beneath it was a timestamp from 27 minutes before the money supposedly disappeared. The message preview vanished almost instantly. 3 words. Delete old backups. Yet those 3 words lingered in the room long after the screen went dark. Nobody acknowledged them. Nobody mentioned them. Wealthy people rarely pointed at cracks the moment they appeared. They preferred to step around them until they understood who owned the building. Derek slipped the phone back into his pocket with a small smile. I think we're getting distracted. His voice returned to its usual polished warmth. A missing payroll discrepancy from 18 months ago doesn't explain $12,000 disappearing tonight. The statement sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Several employees nodded again. Emily felt the pressure shift back toward her. She recognized the pattern. Every time a fact surfaced, someone redirected attention toward the waitress. Toward the easiest target in the room. The side door opened. 2 attorneys entered. Dark suits. Expensive watches. Perfect posture. Behind them came Caroline Moretti, Vincent's cousin and the executive director overseeing the hospitality division. She looked like she belonged on magazine covers and corporate boards simultaneously. Her cream-colored blazer probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. Caroline listened for less than a minute before making her decision. "This shouldn't be happening in front of staff," she said calmly. "If there are concerns, legal can review them privately." Her eyes landed briefly on Emily. Not cruel. Worse, dismissive. The way people looked at a spill that someone else would eventually clean up. "Miss Carter," Caroline continued, "I'm sure you're upset, but accusing management based on old records isn't productive." Emily tightened her grip on the blue notebook. The room suddenly felt smaller. She could smell expensive perfume mixed with coffee that had been sitting too long on a warming plate. She became painfully aware of her flour-stained apron and sensible black shoes. Every polished surface reflected people who looked like they belonged there. People with degrees, titles, offices. People who didn't carry old phones because they couldn't afford new ones. "I didn't accuse anyone," Emily said quietly. "I pointed out a deleted record." One attorney smiled. Not kindly, professionally. Deleted records happen all the time. Systems migrate. Files become corrupted. Then why was somebody texting about deleting backups 27 minutes ago? The smile faded. Not completely. Just enough. Caroline folded her arms. "You saw part of a message. We shouldn't jump to conclusions." Again reasonable. Again dangerous. Emily could feel herself being reduced piece by piece. Emotional. Confused. Overwhelmed. A waitress who didn't understand complex systems. The old humiliation returned. The same feeling she had at 13 when adults discussed her as though she wasn't standing in the room. She reached for the notebook instinctively. Not for comfort. For proof. Across the table, Vincent remained silent. He hadn't defended her once. Yet he hadn't interrupted her either. That detail mattered. Caroline stepped closer to him. "Vincent, with respect, this is becoming a distraction. We have lawyers for a reason." The room waited. Emily watched Vincent study the notebook instead of Caroline. Not the accusations. Not the missing money. The notebook. His attention lingered on the worn edges. The cracked spine. The pages swollen from years of use. Finally, he spoke. "How long have you been carrying that?" Emily blinked. The question caught everyone off guard. "About 18 months. Every shift." "Yes." Caroline exhaled softly, almost amused. "That doesn't prove anything." Vincent's eyes never left the notebook. "No." His voice was low. "It proves commitment." The room fell silent. Not because he believed Emily. He clearly didn't. Not yet. But for the first time, he had challenged the assumption that she was irrational. Derek moved quickly. Too quickly. "If we're finished with notebooks, maybe we should focus on the actual theft." As he spoke, he reached for a stack of printed shift reports near the monitor. One sheet slipped free and landed upside down on the table. Nobody noticed except Emily. Her eyes locked onto a handwritten correction at the bottom of the page. The shift log had been altered. The time wasn't changed. The handwriting wasn't changed. Only one thing had been changed. Her employee number. And the ink was still fresh enough to smear. The smear caught the light before anyone else noticed it. A thin streak of dark blue ink dragged across the corner of the shift report where Emily's employee number had been written over. Not corrected. Rewritten. Fresh enough that the edge still reflected beneath the fluorescent lights. Emily's pulse slowed instead of quickening. That always happened when something finally made sense. Fear became focus. She stepped forward and touched the paper with one finger. The ink transferred immediately. Derek reacted before he could stop himself. "Careful," he said sharply. Then his expression softened. "Those reports were printed earlier tonight." Too late. Everyone had heard the first voice before the second one arrived. Vincent had heard it too. The room settled into another heavy silence. Not the silence of uncertainty. The silence of people rearranging what they thought they knew. Emily looked at the report. Then at Derek. Then back at the report. "The printer uses black toner." Nobody answered. "So why was my employee number changed with blue ink?" Derek smiled again. Smaller this time. "Because managers make notes all the time. Reasonable. Plausible. Almost convincing. Emily nodded once. Then why only mine? The question landed and stayed there. No one rushed to answer it. Caroline shifted her weight. One of the attorneys glanced down at the report and immediately away again. Vincent still hadn't spoken. He sat at the end of the table with one hand resting against the armrest, studying the paper as though it contained something larger than an altered employee number. Emily reached into her apron pocket. Slowly, deliberately, not dramatic. She removed a folded envelope sealed with clear tape. The edges were worn from being carried around for months. Derek's eyes found it immediately. For the first time all night, something close to genuine concern appeared behind his composure. Emily noticed. So did Vincent. What is that? Caroline asked. Emily placed the envelope on the table. The reason I started keeping records. Nobody moved. She opened the envelope carefully and removed a receipt. Not a restaurant receipt. A hospital billing statement. The paper was creased nearly in half. Water damaged. Handled too many times. A faint coffee stain spread across one corner. At the top was a date from 18 months ago. The same week as the first missing tip alert. The same week as the deleted access record. The same week as the disabled maintenance code. Emily's voice remained steady. A server named Rachel Monroe worked here. Several older employees lowered their eyes. One busser stopped breathing for a second. Rachel thought she was missing tip money because she'd made mistakes. Derek told her she was confused. Nobody interrupted. She stopped paying for her medication. Emily slid the statement forward. This was the emergency room bill after she collapsed during a double shift. The room changed. Not dramatically, not visibly, but something shifted beneath it. Missing money felt different when attached to a face, to a hospital bracelet, to a woman who had trusted the wrong explanation. Derek exhaled slowly. That's tragic, but it doesn't prove theft. His voice had recovered. Professional again. People struggle financially for many reasons. You're right, Emily said. It doesn't prove theft. She reached for the old phone, opened a photo, then handed it across the table. Vincent took it. The image showed Rachel standing beside the employee tip board almost 2 years earlier. Smiling, tired, holding a payout envelope. At first glance, there was nothing unusual. Then Vincent looked closer. A shadow appeared in the reflection of the glass behind her. Someone standing near the board. Watching. He enlarged the image. The reflection sharpened just enough. A familiar suit jacket. A silver watch. Derek's watch. Derek leaned forward immediately. That could be anyone. Vincent remained silent. Longer than usual. His eyes stayed on the photograph. Then they moved, slowly, toward Derek's wrist. The silver watch he was wearing tonight was identical. The silver watch seemed to shine brighter after that. Not because anything about it changed. Because Vincent Moretti was looking at it now. Derek noticed the look and casually lowered his wrist beneath the table. A small movement. The kind most people would miss. Vincent did not. The room remained quiet for several long seconds. Then Vincent stood. No raised voice. No threats. No dramatic declaration. Just a chair moving softly across polished flooring. Somehow that sound carried more weight than shouting ever could. We're done for tonight. Confusion flickered across several faces. Derek recovered first. Vincent, I really think... You're done talking. The words were calm. Almost gentle. Derek stopped immediately. Vincent turned toward one of his attorneys. I want copies of every payroll report from the last 2 years. Then to another. Every shift log. Every access record. Every deleted file. Nobody moved for a second. Then they did. Fast. The atmosphere changed in a way Emily could feel but couldn't describe. It was like watching a storm move across water. Nothing had happened yet. Everything had already changed. Caroline stepped forward. This is becoming excessive. Vincent looked at her. Only looked. Caroline did not continue. Emily stood near the edge of the room with her blue notebook pressed against her chest. For the first time all night, nobody was looking at her like a thief. They weren't looking at her much at all. Their attention had shifted somewhere else, somewhere more dangerous. An hour later, rain tapped softly against the windows of Vincent's private office upstairs. The city beyond the glass shimmered with red brake lights and reflected neon. A small lamp illuminated stacks of personnel files spread across a conference table. The smell of coffee had gone stale. Vincent sat alone except for his attorney, Marcus Hale, who flipped through payroll reports with increasing concern. "This isn't random," Marcus said quietly. "Look at the pattern." Vincent already had. Small amounts, different employees, different weeks. Never enough to trigger an audit. Never enough for a lawsuit. Never enough to make wealthy executives pay attention. But enough to hurt people living paycheck to paycheck. Enough to make someone miss rent. Enough to miss medication. Enough to make a hospital bill impossible. Vincent stared at Rachel Monroe's emergency room statement again. $386.40. Such a small number. Marcus placed another file in front of him. "You should see this." It was an employee resignation report. Then another. And another. 9 resignations over 18 months. All citing financial hardship. All from employees whose tip records appeared in Emily's notebook. Vincent's expression never changed. Yet something behind his eyes grew colder. Downstairs, the restaurant had finally emptied. Emily sat alone in the break room beneath flickering fluorescent lights. A vending machine hummed softly in the corner. Her old phone rested beside a stack of unpaid hospital invoices for her mother. She stared at them for a moment before folding them closed again. When the door opened, she expected another lawyer. Instead, Vincent stepped inside. Neither spoke immediately. The refrigerator compressor clicked on behind them. Emily looked down at her bills. "I don't want money." Vincent said nothing. She swallowed. "I don't want a settlement either." Still silence. Emily finally lifted her eyes. "I just want people to stop using things like this." She touched the invoices. Every time someone couldn't explain where the money went, they pointed at whoever was struggling the most. Vincent studied her for several seconds. Not her notebook. Not the evidence. Her. Then he asked a single question. "Why didn't you leave?" Emily looked surprised. "Because someone had to keep track." The answer settled heavily between them. Vincent glanced at the blue notebook. 18 months of names, dates, numbers, quiet persistence. Not greed, not obsession. Responsibility. His phone vibrated against the table. One text message. "Marcus." Vincent opened it. Attached was a scanned authorization form granting payroll override access. Only 2 signatures appeared on the document. One belonged to Derek Vaughn. The other belonged to a man Vincent had trusted for almost 12 years. The second signature sat at the bottom of the authorization form like a stain that would not wash out. Vincent stared at it for several seconds. 12 years. 12 years of loyalty, meetings, handshakes, holiday dinners, and quiet trust condensed into a single line of ink. He locked his phone and looked across the break room. Emily was gathering her hospital invoices back into a worn manila folder. She handled every page carefully, smoothing bent corners with her fingertips. Most people protected money. She protected records. Vincent noticed that. He noticed everything now. "Emily." She looked up immediately. "What color was the envelope?" The question seemed to come from nowhere. "The tip envelope?" "Yes." She frowned. "Dark cream. Anything else?" Emily thought for a moment. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. "The seal was gold." Vincent said nothing. Across town, on the top floor of the hospitality headquarters, a private conference room remained lit well past midnight. Rain tapped softly against floor-to-ceiling windows. A crystal decanter sat untouched beside 3 glasses. One chair remained empty. Another was occupied by Derek Vaughn. The third belonged to Harold Finch, the regional operations director whose signature sat beneath Derek's on the authorization form. Harold looked annoyed rather than worried. That bothered Vincent more than panic would have. Panic meant surprise. Annoyance suggested practice. A security camera in the corner blinked steadily. Vincent entered without hurry. Marcus followed carrying a thin black folder. Nobody stood. Nobody offered greetings. "Tell me about the envelope," Vincent said. Derek blinked. Harold exchanged a glance with him. "What envelope?" Vincent took a seat. "The missing tip envelope." Silence stretched. Rain tapped the glass. Somewhere in the building, an elevator bell chimed. Harold finally shrugged. "Standard white payroll envelope." Vincent leaned back. "White. That's what I said." Derek nodded immediately. "White." The answer arrived too quickly. Vincent did not react. He simply folded his hands. "Interesting." Nobody spoke. Marcus opened the black folder and slid a photograph onto the table. It showed the missing envelope taken earlier that evening during routine accounting procedures. Dark cream.
Cold cell.
Exactly as Emily described. Harold's eyes moved to Derek. Derek's jaw tightened. Just slightly. The first crack. Vincent remained calm. "Try again." Nobody answered. A phone vibrated somewhere on the conference table. No one touched it. The sound stopped, then came back, then stopped again. Derek stared at the polished wood surface instead of the photograph. "I don't memorize envelopes." "No," Vincent said softly. "But Emily did." The room became very still. Harold shifted in his chair. "A waitress noticing stationery proves nothing." Vincent nodded once. "You're right." Then he looked toward Marcus. Another document appeared. This one was a printed inventory request submitted 6 months earlier. Gold-sealed accounting envelopes, ordered personally by Harold Finch. The same envelopes Harold had just failed to recognize. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The trap had not been complicated. It only required one truthful memory from a woman everyone thought was insignificant. Derek finally cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous." Yet his voice lacked its usual confidence. Vincent studied him carefully. "Is it?" Another silence followed. Longer this time. "Dangerous." Derek's hand moved toward the conference table edge. Not enough to stand. Not enough to run. Just enough to reveal uncertainty. For the first time all night, he wasn't managing the room. He wasn't guiding the narrative. He wasn't deciding who looked guilty. The balance had shifted. Slowly, quietly, like ice cracking beneath someone's feet. And as Derek looked toward the door, he found Emily standing beside Marcus in the hallway beyond the glass wall, holding her blue notebook against her chest. And in that moment he finally understood she was no longer standing there alone. The glass wall reflected Emily's image beside the blue notebook, and for the first time all night, nobody looked through her. Derek looked away first. It was a small thing. Almost invisible, yet Vincent saw it. People looked away from evidence when they knew what it meant. By 8 o'clock the next morning, every senior manager in the hospitality division had been summoned to the flagship restaurant. Not upstairs. Not in a private boardroom. Vincent chose the tip distribution room. The same room where Emily had been asked to sign a confession. The same room where employees stood every week waiting to learn whether they could pay rent, buy groceries, or fill prescriptions. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The long table was crowded with folders, payroll records, printed emails, access logs, and one dark blue notebook resting directly in the center. Nobody touched it. Rain still streaked the windows outside. The room smelled faintly of coffee and damp wool coats. Derek sat at one end. Harold Finch sat beside him. Neither looked comfortable anymore. Yet both continued pretending. That was the remarkable thing about lies. Even after they began collapsing, people still tried to live inside them. Marcus connected a laptop to the wall monitor. A progress bar crawled across the screen. 43%. 51. 68. Nobody spoke. The silence tightened. A phone vibrated somewhere. No one reached for it. Emily stood near the back wall. She wasn't there because anyone had invited her to power. She was there because she refused to let the truth disappear again. Vincent sat across from the monitor with both hands folded. Motionless. Waiting. At 99%, Derek finally broke. "This is unnecessary." His voice sounded dry. You've already proven there were accounting errors. Vincent looked at him. Errors. One word. Nothing more. Derek swallowed. The file opened. Security footage appeared on the screen. Not from last night. Not from 18 months ago. From 6 months earlier. Restored from an archived backup Marcus had located only hours before. Grainy footage. A hallway. The accounting office. A locked door. A cream-colored envelope with a gold seal. The room watched in silence as Harold entered carrying the envelope. 2 minutes later Derek entered. For minutes later both men left. The envelope never appeared again. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loudly. The recording continued. A timestamp appeared. Then another. Then another. Different weeks. Different envelopes. Different dates. Same pattern. Same office. Same people. Derek lowered his eyes. Harold stared at the table. But Vincent wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking at another file Marcus had placed beside him. An original payroll authorization packet. The version before edits. The version nobody was supposed to find. Vincent opened it slowly. One page had been replaced. Another signature added. Not forged. Real. His signature. A document he had approved years ago without reading carefully because he trusted the people beneath him. Trusted them to protect workers carrying trays and cleaning tables and counting tips at midnight. Emily noticed the color leave his face before anyone else did. It wasn't dramatic. Just a man discovering that his own name had helped build something rotten. She stepped forward quietly and placed one final item on the table. Her old phone. There's one more thing. Nobody stopped her. She opened an audio file recovered from a cloud backup she had forgotten existed. A voice filled the room. Rachel Monroe. Tired. Frightened. Crying softly. I know the numbers don't match. I know they don't. But Derek said nobody's going to believe me. Silence followed the recording. Heavy.
Permanent.
No explanation arrived.
No clever argument. No polished excuse.
The room had finally run out of places to hide. Vincent stared at the notebook. 18 months of names. Dates. Missing money. Human beings reduced to accounting discrepancies while he looked elsewhere. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost too quiet to hear. I signed that. Nobody answered. He closed the folder. Removed his glasses. Set them carefully beside the notebook. Then he looked toward Marcus without taking his eyes off Derek and Harold. Call my attorney. For several seconds after Vincent spoke, nobody moved. The rain continued tapping against the windows. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere beyond the closed door, dishes clinked faintly in the restaurant preparing for another day. The world kept moving. The room did not. Derek stared at the table. Harold stared at nothing. The blue notebook remained in the center between them all, no longer looking small. 2 months later, federal investigators had copies of every payroll file, access record, deleted archive, and financial transfer connected to the scheme. Derek Vaughn was terminated before sunrise the following day. Harold Finch resigned before the board could vote. Lawsuits followed. Audits followed. Repayment orders followed. The numbers eventually reached hundreds of thousands of dollars spread across dozens of employees. But the money was only part of the damage. The harder thing to measure was trust. The harder thing to return was dignity. Vincent learned that slowly. On a gray Tuesday morning, every employee from the flagship restaurant gathered in the dining room before opening. Sunlight filtered through the front windows and settled across polished tables that had not yet been set for lunch service. At the front of the room stood a new transparency board showing weekly tip distributions. Every employee could see every number.
No hidden adjustments.
No private overrides. No missing names. Marcus stood beside it with legal documents confirming back payments. Several servers cried quietly when they received theirs. One dishwasher sat down because his knees gave out. A line cook called his wife. Another employee simply stared at the check in his hand as though he had forgotten how to believe good news. Then Vincent stepped forward. The room fell silent. Emily remained near the back, still wearing her black apron, still trying not to draw attention to herself. Old habits did not disappear overnight. Vincent looked across the room until he found her. There is one correction left. His voice carried easily through the restaurant. Nobody spoke. Vincent held up a personnel file. Emily's personnel file. The same file that once contained a theft accusation. The same file that nearly became a confession. He opened it, removed the disciplinary report, and tore it in half. Not dramatically, carefully, deliberately. Then he placed the pieces into a shred bin. Emily Carter was never under investigation for theft. The words settled over the room. The record has been corrected. He paused. So has the story. Nobody applauded. Somehow that made it more powerful. Employees simply looked toward Emily differently than before. Not with pity. Not with suspicion. With respect. Later that afternoon, a private healthcare advocate arrived at her mother's apartment. Outstanding hospital bills were renegotiated. Insurance appeals that had been ignored for months were reopened. Legal protections were put in place so no employer could ever access or weaponize those records again. Vincent paid for none of it personally. Instead, he used the company's resources to repair what the company had helped break. That mattered more. 3 weeks later, Emily sat alone in the restaurant before opening. The dining room was quiet. Morning light stretched across the floor. A fresh cup of coffee warmed her hands. Beside her sat the old phone with the cracked screen. She had considered throwing it away a dozen times. She never did. The phone had been proof when nobody listened. The blue notebook rested beside it. Its pages were no longer evidence. They had become policy. Every safeguard in the new system traced back to something written inside those worn covers. A shadow appeared across the table. Vincent set down a new employee handbook. Emily opened it. On the first page was a simple acknowledgement section, a place for signatures. She stared at it for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You know," she said, reaching for a pen, "this is the first document I've ever signed because I wanted to." Vincent said nothing. He simply watched her write her name. Clear, steady, unafraid. Outside, the restaurant lights flickered on one by one as another shift prepared to begin. The old phone remained on the table. The blue notebook remained beside it. Once they had been reminders of being ignored. Now they were proof that the truth had outlived the people who tried to bury it, and that the woman nobody listened to had finally been heard.